I want to welcome you this morning to our second invited paper session for the Carl Conference. Thus far, I can say for myself that our speakers have been outstanding, and we will not disappoint with these next two people because they're fabulous. They are fabulous. They're going to knock your socks off as well. Let me tell you a little bit about them. One of our speakers, Char, explores the integration of education, research, technology, and design in libraries. She is Instruction Services Manager, e-learning librarian at the Claremont Colleges, and recently joined the ACRL Immersion faculty. An ALA emerging leader and library journal mover and shaker, Char blogs at Infomational and tweets at Char. Her publications include Reflective Teaching, Effective Learning, Instructional Literacy for Library Educators, and that is ALA Editions 2011, and also Informing Innovation, Tracking Student Interest in Emerging Library Technologies, which was published by ACRL in 2009. She is joined by Brian Mathews, and oh, you had to leave our great state of California, huh, Brian? Okay, for the East Coast, but that's okay. We still love you. Brian Mathews is Associate Dean for Learning and Outreach for Virginia Tech. He previously served as Assistant University Librarian at UC Santa Barbara, where he oversaw the library's assessment and marketing initiatives, as well as web content development and learning space design. That's a huge job. That's why you left, right? Okay. Look at him. Oh, okay. I love your face there. I'm just teasing with you. Brian has written a book entitled Marketing Today's Academic Library, and that was published by ALA Editions in 2009. He writes a monthly column for American Libraries magazine titled Next Steps, focusing on the leadership strategies of inspiring libraries. And he maintains his blog, The Ubiquitous Librarian, hosted by the Chronicle of Higher Education. This morning, Char and Brian are going to talk to us about threshold concepts and curriculum mapping, which is truly near and dear to my IL heart. So help me to welcome them, please.
All right, hi everybody. How am I sounding to y'all? Good. I'm oddly quiet for a teacher, so please, if I fade, just give me a little hand, okay? So I am Char. I'm very glad to be here, and this has indeed been an awesome conference so far, and I hope we're not going to disappoint any. I like to clutch a podium like this, and Brian likes to wander around, and I'm pretty short, and he's kind of tall, so hopefully this will make it not too hard on the cameras. So we're gonna mix it up a little bit, right? So anyway, we are here to mutually kind of support each other as we talk about threshold concepts and curriculum mapping. And I want to give you a very brief introduction as to why we're doing this together. So I've had a library crush on Brian for a really long time, as I'm sure many of y'all have, and so we were kind of searching for an excuse to work together for a really long time, and we learned that we had both been invited to give an invited paper here at Carl, which is what you do when you are invited to give a paper. You give it. So we're like, oh my God, well, what are you going to talk about? What are you going to talk about? So maybe our ideas would overlap. Maybe there would be some kind of some synergy there, if you will. So it turns out there was, and we're going to go into why that is, and that's what we're going to talk about today. And I also just wanted to mention that I have it on good authority that the only reason Brian left California is because you couldn't find a good ham and cheese sandwich here. So I just wanted to put that out there. It wasn't the job at all. Okay, so before we get going, I wanted to ask you if you recognize this. Oh my God, that was so fast. I even had a little prompt built in case you couldn't figure out what that was. But yeah, it's the carpet, right? This is kind of some amazing carpet. How does this carpet make you feel? See, I like it. I think it's awesome. Right? It's really freaky. Okay, so I have this thing with conferences. Sometimes you can go into a conference and you can kind of do this. you have this little tunnel vision box, and you don't really look out and see what's happening around you, right? But if you did that, you'd miss the amazing carpet and the like kind of nutty chandeliers going on, right? Like, so they're everywhere, and they're kind of awesome. But the point of me putting this in here is that if you stop and look around for a little bit, you'll realize that there are kind of contextual details everywhere that are affecting your experience, right? So the point of noting the carpet and noting the ceiling and mentioning that this is happening at a conference is to say nothing is ever the same experience. Like, everyone is having a different kind of like view on things, and if you pay attention to everything that's happening, you will respond differently. So we were able to build in this little hook at the beginning of our presentation. If we hadn't looked down, we would just be talking about boring stuff already. So anyway, moving right along.
For the introduction part, I'll use this. I won't mosey around. Yeah. and this talk really kind of began about a year ago. Last summer, we met up in New Orleans, ALA, in a bar, and I was talking about we were talking about curriculum mapping, and it was a great sort of strategy that could solve a lot of problems I was experiencing at that time, professional problems. But that kind of prompted Char to kind of like pull out her laptop, and here we are going through a lot of the sort of content you're going to see later today, but built upon that is what she's done over the last year, and you can kind of see how she's been able to develop that, even further. So I think you're in for a treat for that. That's been really kind of rewarding for me. But the main point we really wanted to stress, and I've kind of picked up a little bit on what you guys have been talking about this week, is how do we sort of step out of the role that we have, the role that we're sort of identified with, and kind of get into this theme right here, the learner experience. And the learner experience, as opposed to the packaging of information literacy in different ways, but again, looking at the learner experience is the thing that unites kind of Char and I sort of professionally. It's kind of what we're both really kind of interested in, and approaching that through different lenses and different methods. And that's what we're kind of doing today, is we're each going to be kind of sharing a different method. I picked up like a bronchitis, and it's gone now. That's what happens when you move back east or something, like the new germs or anything like that. So I had to apologize. I'm going to be kind of coughing a little bit throughout the thing. But the main point, and then we'll kind of kick this off, is that the more deeper I find myself in administration and talking with other administrators on campus, you just kind of see how much higher ed is sort of changing. And when you have provosts worried about the future of higher ed, then you know that there's something there. And the pedagogy, the technology, the spaces, all that is going to change. But the thread that will remain is the sort of the learning. How that happens, that's to be sort of determined, that's to be seen, that's what we're experimenting with right now. But the main thing that we want to emphasize too is that the library needs to be embedded in that, not embedded in being what a library is. And so it really challenges us to sort of rethink the sort of identity and maybe even sort of expand the opportunities, which we'll get into later on. But that's kind of how we wanted to sort of frame this, is that there's, by connecting ourselves to the learner experience as opposed to the library experience, it opens up some new paths for us.
All right, so how many of you have heard or know about otherwise this concept of third place, just generally? Does anyone want to offer a definition? And I'll repeat it back for the lovely cameras. Anyone? What is third place? Don't be shy. Wait, can you say again? So one possible definition is non-commercial or not a marketplace. That's definitely one of the ways that it's referred to, but that's not what I was looking for. So I'm going to move on. So does anyone? Laurel, hi. Not work, not home. So Ms. Laurel Crump offers not work, not home, and that's absolutely what I was looking for. Thank you. So third place is actually an architectural term that's really meant to describe somewhere that is not the home, not the work. It's the place that you go that's kind of a different sort of space for you to unwind, for you to find a different sort of life, right? The way this is usually referred to in reference to libraries is the library building. Okay, so libraries become third spaces by creating cafes, by putting out some cushions, awesome comfy seats. So that's one way to look at this. But what I want to try to emphasize is that libraries need to become pedagogical third places. We need to change the way that we collaborate with our students and our faculty in order to become a third place for learning, a third place for instruction on our campuses, rather than just a content repository or a place with comfy pillows. Like, we need to begin working in creative and different ways and break out of this kind of like aisle tunnel vision that many of us have, and I'm totally guilty of this myself, right? So the traditional learner-teacher paradigm, if you'll look at my representative little graphics up here, over on the left-hand side, we have the first space of the learner, right? So that's a paper, blue dot, that's a student. On the other side, we have the faculty member, so a little green dot. What we need to explore is where does the library intersect this relationship on each of our campuses, within each of our learning communities? And it's always going to look different. There's no like cookie cutter, this is how we can fit in here, this is how we can support here. You have to explore these contextual details in your own context. This is very, very critical. And what we're trying to do is really reframe the way that our communities understand who we are and the way that they come to librarians for these types of partnerships. And this image is really meant to represent the library as a learning platform. So how can we offer a place for people to kind of like jump off from, a jumping off point for different types of learning experiences? How do we augment the critical thinking skills and the research literacy of our students? And one of the ways, if you can see all the way down at the bottom of the screen, I know it's kind of hard for you at the back of the sight line, a concept that is really near and dear to my own heart is that of instructional literacy. So rather than focusing on content, which has been the real message of information literacy for a very long time, this is the stuff that we teach. But focusing on instructional literacy, how we teach this, the confidence that we have as educators, this is a completely different thing and something that's been underemphasized, I think, in our field. And a key aspect of building instructional literacy as librarians is focusing on the communities of practice that comprise our own institutions. So how do we learn what our schools, what our colleges, what our community colleges, what makes them tick, what makes them work, what makes them unique and different? And you can take this on a lot of levels. This goes for academic departments, divisions, larger schools, academic disciplines, research teams, majors. Many of us are liaisons. Many of us have disciplinary purview. If we do not embed ourselves, and not just in the traditional definition of embedding, if we don't to really dig in to the communities that we represent, we won't understand what's actually going on. We won't see the carpet, we won't see the ceiling. We won't understand that people are being made nauseated by the requirements, or the carpet, whichever, So this is what Brian and I are really gonna try to get at today. We're gonna offer you two different strategies for how you might start investigating these details, these contextual details. And Brian is going to come at it from the cognitive side, the large brain representing the cognitive side, and he's going to talk about threshold concepts.
Which really kind of boils down in like the one sentence definition is that there's a series of knowledge points, knowledge milestones that are sort of essential for learners to understand, and if they don't, second sentence, if they're unable to grasp those milestones, then it prevents them from learning. So it's kind of looking at that what's the path, what's that journey of the learner experience in a discipline framework.
Right. So on the conceptual side, we're going to talk about those large ideas that people grapple with over the course of their education. And then on the structural or more practical side, I'm going to talk about the strategy of curriculum mapping, visual curriculum mapping, which really helps you get a handle on the actual academic communities of practice that you're working with and identifies strategic points of intersection, strategic points for collaboration. Really helps you narrow and focus your efforts rather than doing this scattershot kind of approach to collaboration within institutions.
Now, I can do a whole hour on just talking about chess, and I told Char I wouldn't do that.
Yeah, I have a cane up here if I need to shut him up.
So I'm not going to go there. But in our conversations, what we've kind of seen is it kind of comes down to strategy and tactics. And tactics, to me, are sort of the performance or delivery of the content in the classroom. And that's not what we're talking about. I think with that, I recommend Char's book about reflective. Go out and buy it. I think it's available in Kindle format, too. I don't know.
I think so, but I heard recently that the Kindle format has lots of typos, so you might want to avoid that. Somebody just said yes.
We actually have it at Virginia Tech. We have 10 or 12 librarians that we purchased the book for, and they're kind of going through a learning community right now where they sort of meet weekly. They talk about that. So that goal is how do we become better, more efficient sort of instructors. That's not what we're talking about today. The other part, that's what I refer to as sort of the tactics of delivery. What we're really looking at is sort of strategy, and that there's what is our approach to be effective in terms of reaching our campus? And then what we're going to see, there's a couple things that kind of hold us back. I don't have the clicker. There's a couple things that kind of hold us back from that. And by using the two methods that we talk about or other methods, we can kind of approach that more effectively. So one of the problems that I have in my current job, and I've seen it at other libraries, perhaps you do too, depending on the size of your institution, is scale, where we can't reach everyone. And even if, like right now, I think Virginia Tech, we're reaching, best case scenario, maybe 30% of our students. That's thousands and thousands of students that we're not reaching. And so again, you have very limited time, you have very limited human resources, you have limited spaces to teach. How do we sort of scale our sort of instructional ambitions with sort of the realities of that? Another thing is redundancy. So now we're reaching 30%, but sometimes we're reaching people 2 or 3 times with the same lesson. And you know, I kind of see that a lot in feedback too, where I already know how to use the catalog. Now I'm kind of wasting this class time, strong word there, but you know, wasting this class time, having to sit through that again, and sometimes it's even the same examples. So how can we use something like curriculum mapping or other tools to sort of maybe pace the delivery of our instructional program? There's practical versus theoretical, where again, we have the desire of helping the student get the grade, helping the student get what they need to get through that paper, versus the higher end things that we kind of write about a lot. You see this in all the literature about the critical thinking and the lifelong learning and the sort of, you know, those kind of aspects. So how do we sort of balance that? Here's how you use the interfaces to, here's how you use the databases to find these articles, versus how do you sort of evaluate the merits of this article. And then the last part is training. And it's in sort of quotes too, because this is a conversation we have a lot right now, is are we training people to use interfaces, or are we sort of training them to be literate in a 21st century context? And that's the thing that we're kind of concerned about, because do we need, rhetorical question there, but do we need sort of librarians to train people how to use interfaces? There's nuances and things like that, but that's, as we think about the future, that's something that sort of worries me. And we'll kind of look into that a little bit more, but again, this is sort of, again, how can we effectively use sort of the time and resource we have to sort of have a deep impact within the discipline. So we're going to get into threshold concepts. I don't know if this is working.
Just banging on the table.
Threshold concepts. And I kind of got into this idea at UC Santa Barbara with the writing program, and what they were doing is looking at what are the sort of problems that students have with writing, and not talking about composition or English, but sort of at a higher disciplinary level. So you're looking at, you know, the biology students that have to write a lab report, the business students that are writing a business plan, engineers that are doing sort of like data analysis. But there's all types of sort of writing within the disciplines. And I kind of was really inspired about how they were kind of doing that. They're not looking at just composition, but they're looking at what happens next. You know, what happens when it's really sort of something that they might have more connection to, where they kind of start seeing themselves as sort of professionals and into their sort of discipline, something they're hopefully excited about. How does that translate? And so this concept of threshold concepts, I'll just read it to you here because I think they can explain it better than I can. The threshold concept can be considered as akin to a portal, opening up a new and previously inaccessible way of thinking about something. It represents a transformed way of understanding, interpreting, or viewing something without which the learner cannot progress. I think that key piece there is that without which the learner cannot progress. And this, you know, has been around, you know, much longer than when the term threshold concepts was derived, which was about 10 years ago in the United Kingdom, where they did a study, and they kind of were looking at what holds back undergrads from being successful, or the flip side is when it works well, what happens. And that's what they came back with a lot of different theories, a lot of different concepts. And that original report we have at the end of the slide, we can kind of show you that. But you know, threshold concepts was one thing they saw, is that a lot of times, maybe this is shocking to you, but students will pass a class without fully understanding everything that they should have attained. And then they go, so you take that first class, you go to the next one, which requires that prerequisite, and now there's something missing, and then failure kind of happens, and bad failure, not good failure. And so that's one of the things that they're kind of trying to explore. And it's been this whole sort of conversation. I'll get back to the whole conversation in a minute. I always use Matrix everywhere I go now in this one, because the Matrix really is a coming-of-age story where our hero grapples with the realities of his world and accepts them and then makes change happen. That's the kind of thing. But really what they saw in this wasn't in their first report, but there's researchers have continued to flesh out this threshold concepts. There's sort of 5 characteristics, 5 qualities that go into defining a threshold concept. The first is that it's transformative. It shifts sort of the way people think about a topic. It shifts the way you understand your discipline or what it is. It is irreversible. So once you kind of learn it, you don't forget it, or it's very hard to unlearn it. And this is what makes it hard to teach. This is kind of when you look at it from the instructor side, it's sort of, it just makes sense. Why don't you understand this? There's this sort of disconnect that kind of happens. It's sort of integrated into other elements, other components, other sort of things that other concepts you've learned before and concepts you're going to learn ahead. So it's a key connector, a keystone piece. It's bounded. It helps give definition. It helps define what the discipline is. And then troublesome. And troublesome is where I really got hooked into that. I love this idea of like troublesome knowledge. And why is it troublesome? Why is it difficult? Sometimes it's just really hard. Like in computer science, it's like there's certain types of programming that is just really hard to do. Other side, in like more of in philosophy and in other areas, it's sort of there's an emotional challenge or there's a value challenge. I mean, there's just kind of things that you have to encounter. So there's a whole host of reasons why knowledge is troublesome. But as people connected to information science, in the knowledge business, this is the kind of stuff that we should be thinking about and talking about, because a lot of our faculty, as you kind of dig into let's go to the next one. As you dig into it, you kind of see that this is sort of in the last 10 years. That first report came out in 2003, and there's just been a whole host of information published about it. There's conferences about it. It's really big in the UK and Canada, particularly, and in Australia. It's seeping into the United States as well. But this gives you a little more tangible of some of the kind of concepts you can see, like in physics, it's heat transfer, literature, deconstruction, things like that. And that there's a series of these points, again, that it's not always a linear thing, but it's sort of how they build upon each other. And there's sort of pieces, there's components that make up the threshold component that students kind of have to encounter. Let's go to the next one. And so this is, in an ideal world, this is the sort of trajectory of, over time, you develop knowledge and skills, and it's sort of a nice acceleration. But in reality, it's a little bit more like this, where there's sort of a step, and then you plateau, and then you kind of learn something else, and then you plateau. And it comes at different paces. And it's different paces. I know I'm probably killing the camera guys walking here, but it comes at different paces. And then it actually probably looks a little bit more like this, is sort of one of the theories that come up, where you kind of have some, I think I get it, I got it, and maybe I don't, and then you kind of get it again, and it's sort of, there's a lot of doubt that comes in, there's a lot of practice, until you can read something and comprehend it, but then when does it really sort of click and you realize, that's how it works, and that kind of thing. So this is just a rough concept that I made up, so don't believe this one at all. This is kind of, so let's take like econ. Let's say you're in econ 1, and there's 3, I use the word concepts. Maybe they're not the big threshold concepts, but there's 3 main things that the students need to learn. And we can kind of see here with our first example, our student pretty quickly gets concept 1. He lingers a little bit getting concept 2, and then shoots up to concept 3, and he's okay. Our next one, much slower, takes it till midterms before they really are able to get to this first concept, go up to the second concept pretty quickly, but you can see finishes the term without ever reaching that third concept. Gets a C in the class, maybe that's okay. Now you go on to Econ 2, and whatever that third concept is, limit, opportunity cost, whatever, it sort of, it limits your ability to perform in it, and then if that student's not able to kind of jump back and sort of learn that, it really could kind of prohibit. Here we see another student, she's an overachiever. By midterm, she's there. Is she bored with the class, or if she's really an overachiever, she's already on to Econ 2 and thinking about some different things. And then one more, this student doesn't kind of make it to midterms, they kind of drop out. So
it's like this sad line at the very bottom. I don't know.
So the point we want to kind of say too is oftentimes we think about that vacuum of the student, but it's really sort of cohorts that are going through and dealing with these at different levels, at different familiarities, different paces. But that's just kind of another way to think about it. I think next one's.
Can I actually break in? I just had a thought. When Brian was talking about this, I was thinking about, so how do we as librarians really perceive these threshold concepts taking hold in our students? And I think at the disciplinary level, who's had the experience of meeting with a student over a term and they start using words that you don't know anymore because they're getting really into their disciplinary vernacular, and I'm like, oh my God, they're in a cultural studies class and I really don't know what's going on. Can you explain what you mean by that term? That's kind of where I see people learning and grappling with these concepts. They're being acculturated into their disciplines in a way, and when they finally get the words that they're saying, it's like they're getting it and we're maybe losing it. So that's one of those places where you can perceive that the gap between your knowledge and the student's knowledge is widening, and that's why we need to keep up with these things. We need to understand what they're grappling with and the new words that they're learning to express themselves. So, back to Brian.
Okay. How are you with time?
Pretty good. 10:49.
So I'm one of those guys now that always shows his kid now and he kind of does the thing. 13 months, not at this picture. But this is kind of my wife and I were talking about this because I talk about library stuff all the time, and she puts up with it. She's a librarian too.
Yeah.
But so my kid, Leo's his name, he hit a threshold concept himself, and that was crawling. Where for a month, he was like on all fours and rocking. He couldn't quite figure out how to move. And kind of toward the end of that period, he would just cry, like for no reason. He was like frustrated. And this is kind of a thing that in the literature, Char loves the word liminal. I don't like that word. But
I use it because it's a threshold concept word. You're
I know, I don't
you
like
have
it,
to
though.
look it up.
I don't like it. I mean, anyway, it kind of like he knew he wanted to move, but he couldn't quite do it. And so in the literature, they talk a lot about this sort of impartial knowledge, where you kind of start to realize, I don't quite understand how it works, but I know that I don't understand how it works. And they're sort of, the student is sort of frustrated with that. And then one day, he starts moving, and then it was like in 2 days, he starts standing up in his crib, he starts cruising around. It was sort of like unlocked that sort of acceleration of once he could move his arms, he understood I had this body that can move. It unleashed all kinds of trouble for us. But and so this is kind of more of the scientific thing, is you can read about black holes. You read the Wikipedia article, you can read some popular nonfiction about that, but if you really want to study black holes, there's things like, there's these different components, these threshold components that are into that. You can kind of go through them. So there's light and matter and gravity and radiation and so on, all the way up to relativity. All these different theories, and that if you really want to understand these areas, it's a sort of gradual sort of accumulation of knowledge that it's really sort of difficult to understand, and so on. Move me along. This report kind of came out while we were kind of working on this, and I'll just kind of read it and share with it, because it deals with that concept of failure, which Char and I are actually pro-failure, so we kind of like to,
But only the good kind.
Only the good kind, yeah. By being obsessed with success, students are afraid to fail, so they are reluctant to take difficult steps to master new material. Acknowledging that difficulty is a crucial part of learning could stop a vicious cycle in which difficulty creates feelings of incompetence that in turn disrupts learning. So you have to have that swoop that we kind of, that green line right there where you're getting something, you're kind of doubting it, you're testing it, you're building upon it, and then you advance through that. And that it's sort of that journey. It's that process that's kind of happening. It doesn't always just kind of work in that straight line of like you read it and you understand it. And in the threshold concept literature, they talk too a lot about being able to sort of apply that knowledge compared to just mimicking it. So you can read it and you can kind of take a test and do well. Okay, this person gets an A. They understand it, the regurgitation concept. But what they're really, particularly in the UK, that they're kind of looking at too is, how do we kind of get beyond that sort of standardized test model and show sort of proficiency in that? I feel like you want to say something here.
Do I? I guess it's just, you really think about working with individual disciplines and the different ways that our disciplines would view the idea of information literacy, and that's really where a lot of the intersections come in here for me, is really seeing the points along the major where students are grappling with things we can actually help them with, and instead of just kind of like coming in randomly from the side every so often and just kind of like giving them this information literacy burst that they may or may not hear at the right time. So that's really the thing, is like how can we be there to support students when they're at risk of failing, inside themselves or in their classes, like where are those points of intersection again? And that's what I would say right there.
Okay.
Which gets us into...
It transitions into this. I might take over this area just so I can see some notes here. And I have an example, of that, but I'll get to that later. But really, if we view ourselves, I'm doing double mic here, maybe I'll turn this one off. If we view ourselves as educators, it really invites us to kind of join the conversation with faculty in a new way of how do we kind of help students, how do we help students sort of get over that threshold concept, around, under, through it, whatever, and at the same time, how do we help faculty with their sort of on the teaching side of that. And the example I have is I had when I worked in mechanical engineering department, there's 1 week where I had all these students kind of emailing and visiting me and saying that they were struggling with this assignment and they wanted me to help them interpret it. And I'd worked with the class before, and they kind of expected me to kind of be able to tell them, since they kind of feared the professor, and they didn't want to show that ignorance, which kind of gets to what Char's talking about with the sort of the third place, where it's sort of that third place where you're kind of like a intermediary, I guess you can kind of say. So that I kind of established myself as, I'm here to help you. So it wasn't necessarily, I need help finding Article X, it's more of like, what am I supposed to do with this assignment? And so I was able to kind of meet with the professor and sort of explain, and that kind of really increased our relationship, because he kind of realized that he he thought he was very clear. This is kind of another common thing. He thought it was very kind of clear to them and was able to sort of reframe the assignment and invited me, again, to sit in on his classes a lot and to kind of read over his assignments in that way. So that was really a good kind of thing. This faculty now is at Virginia Tech too, so I'm looking to work with him too. Yeah. Okay, so what Char was kind of hitting at is that there's all these kind of opportunities that we have. My current dean, his sort of big motto is we're going to be opportunistic. We're going to take advantage of every opportunity that kind of comes our way. And what we really want to do is kind of position ourselves as partners. There's an example too of when I'm working with that faculty member. I'm not just the library isn't just on week 5 we go in there and you sort of get a tour, but it's something it's a companion along that journey. We're going to see that a little bit more with how Char's work with the curriculum mapping has been able to do that. So what we really want to do is think about how threshold concepts give us an opportunity to practice entrepreneurialism. How do we be strategic, bringing it back to that sort of chess thing, in how do we sort of approach who it is that we help? How do we kind of help our students? How do we help faculty? And one of the ways, there's a couple ways, but one of the ways is really kind of focusing on this piece here, where there's sort of accelerators and sort of barriers to knowledge. And sometimes, again, it's a little bit abstract, but if we're able to kind of find there's key parts of certain classes where students routinely struggle, what is it that we can kind of do with that? And that's kind of what when you read the literature in threshold concepts, which has been just sort of booming over the last 10 years, you see all these different disciplines are I guess you can kind of say like it's still being written of what it is, where there's not, here's all the threshold concepts for architecture, and if you master all of these, you're going, this is kind of a conversation that they're having sort of professionally about what is it within our discipline that is a threshold concept, and what is it that's, that there are these barriers and accelerators to success, and I think that we want to kind of be in on that too. So this is a great opportunity for us to sort of engage our faculty in this manner. But I think there's an internal view and an external view. The internal view is, again, how do we sort of increase our sort of strategic thinking in terms of who and when we teach them. And then there's also the sort of the tactical side, again, of how do we teach in the classroom and what is it that we teach and how do we maybe pace it in terms of across the discipline. There's sort of an interesting model, I'm not saying I endorse it, but it's an interesting model where at Syracuse is looking at, they're not teaching freshmen or sophomores face-to-face. Everything is sort of through modules and tutorials, and they're thinking the strategy there is that allows their librarians to kind of focus on juniors and above, and that's that sort of those problems that we talked about earlier with sort of scale and redundancy and that kind of thing. They kind of feel everybody kind of goes through, their underclassmen go through this sort of a common learning curriculum, and then they can focus on the other things. So in terms of what is it that's sort of difficult about using the library? What do we make difficult? What do students typically have? What are sort of the threshold concepts, even if you want to apply it into sort of information literacy? There's an article in the end of our slides too that sort of is in Portal magazine that they kind of started that conversation about what are the threshold concepts in information literacy and the different concepts that we're teaching, and so they take a first stab at that. But it's really kind of thinking again, what is it that students routinely struggle with? How do we make that difficult? How do we make that work? And what is it that students know and don't know, and how do we sort of pace that? The external view then is, again, how do we interact with this relationship between students and faculty? How do we tap into the learner experience? Just as students are struggling to learn these concepts, the faculty are struggling to teach them. And that's what you see in the literature where they kind of talk about that. There's, we collected all types of different articles across all types of disciplines, and that's what they kind of are admitting and kind of exploring, is it's kind of like, how do we sort of teach these areas more effectively, more efficiently? And we might not be, I couldn't tell you anything about thermodynamics or that kind of a way, but being able to sort of understand that that's sort of a critical thing, and being able to have that conversation around that instead of me just trying to sell the library, but instead kind of connect with faculty on something that's of interest to them. It invites some different ways. Like for that example, again, with being able to work with that faculty by bringing to him the notice that his students are kind of struggling with this, he kind of starts to see me in a different way as well. So using sort of Char's image here about that connection, one of the things we did at Santa Barbara is we started looking at sort of graduate students across different disciplines and looking from day one of when they arrive to when they defend. What is that sort of that production? What is their sort of that path? What is that sort of experience that they have? And we looked a little bit into library use, but our focus wasn't really about the library. It was more about that experience that they have. And we compared that to what their advisors were kind of saying too. And you see sometimes they're sort of, when you look at difficulties, they do overlap, but there's other pieces that they're there's definitely gaps. There's definitely faculty have this perspective, graduate students in different disciplines are having this perspective, and they don't always line up. And likewise, students in certain disciplines are treated a lot differently than other disciplines. And you just kind of come across all these different things. Probably the most insightful combination of curriculum mapping and threshold concepts that I encountered was talking with advisors. And from a strategy point of view, oftentimes when you're a subject liaison, you're kind of approaching the department, you're saying, I'm here to teach, I'm here to help, let me know. And that's sort of the open approach. What I kind of found, particularly in the sciences and engineering, which is a little bit harder of a sell, by talking with advisors, they could kind of pinpoint and say, here's 5 classes that are really difficult that have some sort of information component. In this case, it was like patents and standards and things like that and design elements. And that allowed me to kind of then focus on these 5 faculty, and I could kind of almost use sales tactics to them in terms of taking them to get a coffee, talking about their classes, talking with their students about that. It really allowed me to sort of focus and pinpoint my liaison role of here's 5 classes that are sort of critical for me to help the students advance. And something that we're doing right now at Virginia Tech, we've kind of been dabbling with this, and we're going to ramp it up in the fall, is more of this sort of 360 view where we're kind of where we have 3 disciplines that we're looking at: engineering, a science, and a social science. And we're kind of we're sort of doing interviews and other tactics where we're kind of talking with students, faculty, advisors, the tutors that help those students, and then other support agencies like a writing center and like Media Lab, things like that, where they looking at the barriers and looking at, again, the sort of success points, and then we're kind of going to bring them all together, maybe a nice lunch thing, and kind of say, here's kind of what we're hearing from you guys, and let's kind of debate that, talk about that, and understand. So again, this positions the library in a different way, where we're kind of looking, again, for opportunities we have to expand our relationships with each of these entities, but at the same time, we're sort of showing or positioning ourselves as sort of someone who cares, I guess you can kind of say. How do we kind of, if we can make this cycle work better, and even if it doesn't involve the library, we've improved the sort of learning experience. We kind of have that third place mentality where we can kind of bring people in literally to a third place, but also that sort of in a cognitive way to kind of think a little bit differently about the sort of struggles that people are having. And so this is kind of a, there's a couple readings that we kind of recommend at the end, but if there's one place you wanted to start with threshold concepts, I think this is kind of a nice one. These folks wrote a handful of books, but this one is nice because you get the good introduction that kind of tells you about threshold concepts, but then there's different essays from different disciplines that kind of show you, kind of how it works. And it's really insightful, again, to see, how someone in the humanities and someone in computer science, which don't think maybe have a natural intersection, are struggling with the same thing. I mean, it's not conceptually the same thing. I guess it's conceptually the same thing. The content is different, but it's still, they struggle sort of teaching. And it's sort of a thing it's a global conversation that's happening. Again, it's sort of everywhere. So I'm going to move along to the next piece. We're going to try something different here.
Right. So we're gonna actually ask y'all to help us think about what are the threshold concepts that the students that we interact with, regardless of discipline, what are the concepts in research literacy, information literacy, whatever you choose or prefer to call it, what are they grappling with, right? So a little graphic, if you see, we just kind of we're launching that book cover right off the cliff there to kind of give you an idea of what we're looking for. So what we're going to do at this point is Brian is going to kind of MC a little bit, and I'm gonna just listen to what you have to say and list out these concepts that you're naming, and then we're going to pick one and explore it at greater depth. Right? So do you understand your assignment? Anyone? Yeah? Say what? Right, so actually understanding what you're supposed to do, right? Yeah. So how could we say that elegantly? Do you have an idea? Interpreting assignments, perhaps. Understanding the assignment, okay. All right. Another one?
Okay. Two words we need. 2 words.
Origin of information. I like that. That sounds very dramatic.
Yeah, we gotta repeat it for our virtual.
Origin of information.
Yeah. And what's our first one?
Understanding assignments. Okay. What else?
What else?
Keep them coming. Okay, so one of the threshold concepts you might list would be accessing information, like where is the... Okay, so we're going to put accessing information. I think there was another hand over here.
Thank you. Let's go. Yeah.
So I would like to expand that a little bit. What's behind the subject heading? Like, so if subject heading is really kind of like a content piece, what are we really getting at with the subject heading? What's going on there? Oh, so information organization, define vocab. I mean, these things that are, this is where the conversation gets really interesting. When you're like, okay, so subject headings, is that really a concept? No, that's a name for something. You know, like what do we truly want them to get about why those subject headings are there, right? So it's more about information organization. Ways of thinking about a subject.
Interpretation?
Interpretation, okay, so
Hold on.
organization. You'll have to be the typo police too, please. Mm-hmm. Okay. So you're offering that often students don't think about ways to change or massage or rethink a topic. So just kind of, that's hard again to like in 2 seconds like write down, but I think it's a really important one. So reframing topics maybe. I mean, how about just the good old kind of like citation, attribution? Like how do you actually, you know, like give credit to an idea that came before? So just maybe 1 or 2 more.
We got 5 more.
5 more? Oh my God. I don't know if they're gonna fit. Yeah, please, birthday.
All right,
birthday.
all right.
I think really important is search term generation. That's what I would call it, generating search terms.
Okay, so I would
related to
actually
something
maybe
else?
put that under reframing
Reframing,
topics.
yeah.
Honestly, like. Okay, so actually, this is a great. This is kind of a
Move to the
great
next
thing
piece.
to do here. If we were going to take reframing topics, what are the mini concepts within that? So you're talking about search term generation.
Subject
That has to do with taxonomy, language. So we might add taxonomy here. What else? What's going on here? So. Mm-hmm.
Learning as you go.
Okay, so iterative.
Right.
Terative. Whatever, like just make up a new word.
She
It's
can't
cool.
see. It's not on her screen, so you have to kind of.
Yeah,
look
so
over
y'all
there,
can be
so
like
that's fair.
doubly sorry for me right now because I literally can't see what I'm doing. So iterative searching. Okay. What else happens? Because what we're doing right now is trying to see what would we be teaching if we were truly trying to help a student not run up against this idea, right? So we want to reframe a topic. It's not just, okay, so think of some synonyms. It's like, why would you want to do that? You know, maybe the language that is included in the source that you're searching for is a little bit different because it's in a different discipline. Like, would a psychologist call it that? You know, there's a different threshold concept in a different discipline. So that's kind of what we're challenging. Oh, absolutely. I think analysis is very important in there. Mm-hmm. Sure. So in order to reframe a topic, you have to analyze kind of the context, perhaps. So maybe context analysis. Okay. All right. Maybe one more. If we were going to make a lesson or a learning experience out of reframing a topic, what's one more subconcept we might want to tackle? Mm-hmm.
Well, it's my class assignment, this is our class textbook, and I just get stuff out of this to write my paper. And so just the very notion that they should be seeking out their own materials, whether it's from library resources or from anywhere else.
Right.
Just that
So a more independent engagement?
Independent engagement
Okay.
with their topic.
Okay. All right. So now we've gone from the idea that there are perhaps independent threshold concepts in research or information literacy. And again, we've added a really good article from Portal at the end of the slides that you can refer to if you want to learn more about how a couple of librarians have tackled this. And the idea of doing this is to say, okay, so what really are the crucial barriers, the tipping points that the students that we're working with, independent of discipline or maybe dependent of discipline, are truly struggling, okay? So that was kind of the point of this exercise. So we're gonna jump out of this lovely screen, which was kind of a underhanded introduction to my section of the presentation, which is...
She's sneaky.
I am sneaky, right? Well, that was great. Thanks for your participation. Okay,
She tricks you into learning.
Right, I just tricked you into watching a demonstration, a live demonstration of concept mapping, something that many people have probably already engaged in. Raise your hand if you've mapped a concept. Excellent. Okay, great. So, oh my God, someone was so stoked that they launched their water glass. All right, so concept knowledge mind mapping, it's a very simplistic way of visualizing information where you identify like a core idea and you begin to break it down and draw connections between the subtopics if necessary, right? So in this is my typical, like, I'm gonna give you a training on curricular or concept mapping. So yeah, best breakfast ever. It's different for everybody. For me, it consists of, you know, bacon, chilaquiles, a bunch of different stuff that's really awesome. And ad infinitum, I start breaking those down and showing what they're actually comprised of. And this helps me map my breakfast, if you will. The reason why, oh yeah, and just to name the tool that I just showed you and also the tool that we're using at the Claremont colleges to do this as an organization, it's called Mindomo, one of literally hundreds, perhaps thousands of options that you could use. Mindomo is freemium, get 3 free maps, upgrade for like $2 a month, that's pretty great. And the reason why I like Mindomo is because it's collaborative, you can integrate multimedia, and it's also, you have the ability to publish maps to the web, which makes them...
hosted?
Yeah, they host it. There's an application version, but I generally just use it online. So, all right, so at the Claremont colleges, when I arrived last year at the Claremont colleges plural because there are 7 of them, it's a very complicated layout. So, you know, typically you're a librarian, you work for one institution, you kind of know what's going on. Well, at the Claremont colleges, we work for 7. We're one library right dead smack in the middle of all that. We have Scripps, Harvey Mudd, Pomona, Pitzer. All of these are separate colleges with boards of trustees, different deans, presidents. Each of them has their own array of majors, right? So there's like 6 psychology departments, like 5 history departments. So teaching librarians are taxed to their absolute limit. You have all of these different groups of faculty with learning outcomes that are completely different or non-existent. Hey, and so how in the world am I supposed to manage the instruction of all of these different schools at the same time? So when I arrive, I say, all right, we got to refocus our efforts. We really got to get the lay of the land, understand what we're doing, and what we could be doing more efficiently, right? So we arrived at this idea of using concept mapping to lay out what we had been doing in years past. So my department, Instruction Services, we kind of went back through the statistics and we built maps of each campus and then who had been teaching what at all of these different points. And so this was kind of a retrospective method. But all of a sudden, we started to notice that this, a colleague of mine, Sean Stone, who's really wonderful, he says, Mindomo's like a hammer, whatever you bang it on turns into a nail, which is a really great way to put it, because we're like, oh my God, so maybe if we start mapping events, like discussions or professional development events, this is actually like a live captured record of our conversation. It's a really great brainstorming tool. So we began using this for discussion capture. We started using this program to actually build a community and kind of communicate with our respective campuses. So this, what you're looking at, is a detail from a digital humanities landscapes map that we created to support a Mellon-funded grant initiative that's kind of like new at the Claremont colleges. So you got 7 schools, none of the digital humanists know each other exist. So what's the answer? You go out, well, you get a couple librarians and say, all right, we have a potential, solution for this. We're going to build a map. We're going to kind of like communicate the map to the community. Then the community will tell us what we're missing, right? So we'll build that into the map iteratively. So here's another way we've been using this. But everyone's like, well, what about curriculum mapping, Char? Well, here you go. All right, so this is a really familiar image. This is a course catalog. It's got like 500,000 links. You're like, oh my God, what do I need to find? If you're trying to understand the course of study of a typical student in any college or university, this is what you're going to run up against. It's not particularly good at privileging one type of information. It's not particularly searchable. They're very frustrating, especially for those of us who like to see things in a little bit prettier of a package, right? So what I am arguing for kind of a strategic orientation to the subjects and the communities that you're working with is going from this kind of linear, linky arrangement to building concept maps of disciplines, courses of study, departments, where you decide what jumps out, where you decide what information is important. But the point is to get to this, which is a detail from a recent map that I built for the theater department across the 5 colleges, the undergraduate colleges at Claremont. You're saying, okay, so who are the faculty and staff here? What are the degree requirements? I go into the catalog, I really dig in, and I learn these things. I teach myself these things. So I understand what the student has to go through. I understand what the faculty has to go through to lead the student over those threshold concepts and to the point of graduation. How many of you really know what that takes in your departments? We got one hand. You were so proud. That was awesome. I certainly didn't until I started forcing myself to learn. Like we have this tacit, okay, so students are going to come to the library and they'll use it when they need it. That's not a given anymore. Like this is the first step to truly understanding what people are grappling with and where you can support them, right? So curriculum visualization is what I'm talking about. And it comes back to this idea of understanding the communities of practice that you work with. So what are you going to map? What's important to you? Who do you really want to know? And how can you apply this project? We're doing this as an organization in kind of like on a couple of different levels, as I showed you. And one of the things that it's been most useful for is kind of forcing our liaisons to test their knowledge base. So who are my faculty? What are they teaching? What courses are they offering? What courses have dropped off the map? Am I buying them the right books? Am I teaching in the right places? You know, and if you go through and you have to say, okay, so what does Sherry Linnell look like? What does Joyce Liu look like? This is forced kind of acculturation. Like you are teaching yourself, your community. It's a great process. Yeah. So Brian just mentioned, so this is also creating institutional memory. So if you're building these maps, and what we do is we version them. So we've got our 2011-12 maps, and then we'll go back and we'll copy 2011 and 12. It's the exact same map, and you just change the stuff that's different. So it's not like you don't have to rebuild these things every single time. So yeah, institutional memory, you can export them in Excel, you can export them as PDFs and JPEGs. Really good for that stuff. Here's the other side of the theater map. One of the characteristics of the community of practice of theater is that they put on productions. So what are the student organizations? What is the production information that we need to know about? These are just like basic characteristics of what's going on with these theater kids. So now if I meet one and it's April, I know that she's probably doing her, her senior capstone production, and she's going to be really stressed out. So again, immersive exploration. A lot of people are probably wondering, how long does this take? Well, I can show you a case study. Not as long as you might think, which is awesome. So a colleague of mine, Alex Chappelle, she was really wonderful. She was one of our early adopters. She's the Gender and Women's Studies and Art History librarian at the Claremont Colleges. This is a detail from the first curriculum map she built, which she actually was able to build in an afternoon. It was a really wonderful thing to watch. I'm like, Alex, we're thinking about kind of like engaging liaisons with this idea of mapping their curricula, mapping their communities. And she's like, that's going to take too long. Like, I don't want to do that. And it's like, well, just give it a try. Here's the product. We'll set you up with an account. 3 hours later, she had this beautiful map built, and she's like, Char, it wasn't bad at all. I actually got a lot of good ideas, and I was really excited that she took it up. So her strategy, and this is, again, I did not, suggest really any method of doing this. So she sits down, she says, all right, Gender and Women's Studies. Here's the campus. I'm going to identify the program and the major that I'm working with. I'm then going to list the required courses that every major has to take, like to go through this 5 colleges major. I'm then going to ferret out the objectives and outcomes that each of these departments has set. I'm going to read them. I'm going to link to them so I can make sure I can get back to them. I'm going to make some notes to myself to say, all right, so these are the core classes, but students have to take additional electives outside the department. So where might my efforts be intersecting there as well? And then finally, what she's building in is saying, here's my strategic points of interaction. She's read the course descriptions, she's followed the degree requirements, she knows who the faculty are, she can see where she's already making an impact and where she needs to extend her outreach efforts next year. She got literal, very, very workable, very tangible examples of things that she needed to do differently just by looking at this entire blanketed kind of like perspective on what the students are doing. She took this to the curriculum committee of gender and women's studies, showed it in a meeting, and they're like, oh my God, this is gonna be so useful for our curricular revisions. Can we use this to our own ends? And this keeps happening over and over again. When we build these things, we take it to the faculty, and they're like, oh my God, this is great. We can use this, and we can use it too. So you wanna have any questions at this point before I forge ahead? Yes? Actually, only a couple of times. It's been, okay, so the question was, do you ever share any of these maps with students? And there have been instances where, like there was a student in environmental analysis who was actually on a curriculum revision committee where they were using one of our maps, but mostly now it's been librarians and faculty who have kind of collaborated on these. But the theater department wants to publish the map that we built as, like through their website. So students can kind of explore it. It's got the faculty on there. It's got the production information. It's nicer than the manual that they have right now. So, but that creates a responsibility for us to update them, make sure they're current. So that's kind of like, follow acts that you might want to think about. Let's see. Here's another question in the back.
Have you tried to map or include on your map any of the IL standards? Or, have you...
Great segue. Okay, so the question was, have you tried to map or include on the map any of the IL standards? What I want to do right now, just kind of as the last part of my component before I knock the mic onto the ground, is to talk about a pilot that we've used the curriculum mapping to do what we are calling curricular integration with information literacy instruction. So what you're looking at right now, if anyone wants to get online and actually look live at one of these maps, you can go to tinyurl.com/Claremont-EA map. This is one of the maps that Sean and I developed to work with the environmental analysis program at the Claremont colleges. It's a new program. We weren't doing any instruction for them at all. So it's a newly established program. My department's new. We're like, well, we need a natural collaboration to see if this approach works. Sean and I sat down. We dug into their website. We dug into their kind of like the course, the handbook. We mapped everything out. We identified and developed a secondary map that says, all right, we're going to look at 5 core kind of information literacy areas: location, scope of information, evaluation of information, analysis, interpretation, and ethics. These are very traditional ACRL standards. And we're looking at the core degree sequence of these students and saying, where can we actually intersect and teach these skills across their curriculum in a way that would scale our efforts? We've got like 1 million classes to teach. Where are we going to reach the most students at the most opportune moments? We identified a series of classes. We built a rubric. Please don't try to read this because you're going to have a seizure. But this is kind of the way that you go from the map to, okay, what are the classes that actually matter? Building something that you can then turn around and hand to faculty and say, this is our plan. This is a template approach we want to take with your students. We want to meet them at EA 10, 20, 30, and then a capstone level, right? So this was our plan. We brought it to faculty. They said, actually, we would suggest a few changes. Map is awesome. We're going to use it ourselves. And here's where we think it would be most useful. We then turn around and start working with those classes, starting at the capstone level. So Sean and I have been integrated into the project class, the thesis class, EA 30, 20, down to 10. And we're making a very targeted effort to reach these students only at those levels and really assess what we're doing. One of the most important components of this is arguing to faculty that if we make a requirement of thesis students to upload their theses, this is a really natural point where you can really grapple with these threshold concepts of authorship, of scholarship, of fair use, of citation. So we've identified the perfect moment to truly, truly mentor students into this act of being a scholar rather than mimicking scholarship. So writing a thesis in no overseas, that's not an option anymore for environmental analysis students. And this change happened because of the mapping project, because we established ourselves as librarians who actually had dug in and done our homework into their own curriculum. So we're assessing this as we go. And I'm going to kind of burn through the next two slides because they're not super central to the message I want to leave y'all with here. But the point being that we're really trying to understand if these points of intersection are actually supporting students, the way they use library resources, the way we're supporting them. And then we're building the outcomes into the map so the community can see what we're doing. This is a really important part of this. These are iterative objects. You can go in and say, all right, so now we've worked with, these 5 classes. Here are the videos that we've taken of these faculty, their actual perspectives on this process. And then as we're reading the theses that come in, which are a direct result of this project, lo and behold, they're actually acknowledging myself and my colleague, Sean, for being such close collaborators with them on this process. And this idea of curriculum mapping completely opened these doors for us. So it's kind of an amazing noise happening right now. All right, so I'm about to blast y'all's ears out with a little video. I want to kind of let one of our faculty members speak for themselves here. So this is Professor Char Miller. Well, it's loud. Who's the head of the environmental analysis program, and he's going to be talking about his perspective on curriculum mapping, kind of apart from our actual instruction.
Well, I think one of the cool things about the mapping was that it showed in almost a 3-dimensional form a curriculum that looks linear.
Right.
And it showed its complications, which we knew, but had never quite seen in that graphic quality. And I think part of what that graphic quality showed us is that there are ways in which we can actually streamline some of what we've done. And so I think the mapping, which is like any map, is a way into something, is also a way out of something. And so I think part of what that experience helped us see was that we need to think about the intersections that we may have imagined were there and didn't prove to be so, or that we didn't imagine and are there. And so I think that what that will do is also sort of thicken the program and deepen its significance.
Right, so that's just kind of a really quick perspective on an unintended consequence of doing this as an organization. Every time a liaison or a librarian has developed one of these objects, taken it to a group of faculty, they've made their own use of it. They've applied it in different ways. And I think it's a great demonstration of a way that librarians can build contextual knowledge and really create new roles for themselves as educators within an institution, no matter how complicated it is. And again, it doesn't take that long. And it's important that we do this work ourselves, rather than just tasking students to do it, because you're building as you learn. You're forcing yourself to really get what's going on. So that was basically our two-pronged approach to an invited paper. So both from the perspective of the cognitive aspect of learning more about what you can do within your community, as well as mapping out your literal strategy based on your own perspective and your own abilities. That's kind of the direction we wanted to come at it from. So we only have...
we're just about out of time. I think that the thing is, too, in sort of my notes that I had, is it sort of gives two contexts. It's sort of, this focusing on the learner experience, it challenges sort of how do we view them, so to speak, with, again, opportunities to get involved. But then it also changes how do they view us. With, we've kind of seen with Char's example where they're sort of surprised that we're sort of pleasantly surprised that we're actually, interested in this thing. And that, likewise, I've had that too, where people, positions the library, again, as a sort of a companion on that learning journey, rather than just, we go for 1 hour to get that tour. So I think we'll take questions. I mean, we're sort of dabblers in this area, but I think we're also interested, and we have a little bit of time, very little bit of time, in hearing maybe about how you might apply these, or how you have applied or dabbled with sort of these, or again, how do you tap into sort of that learner experience at your place, and how you might be able to make that happen. So we'll just open the floor. We'll give the birthday preference if there's any. Anything you want to say.
Anything special? I wish I could just give you the basket.
No, there's like booze in here.
And actually, there's a couple of mics which will help people on the virtual end understand and hear.
And there is another session coming up, so we want to be.
Yeah, I believe the next session starts at 11:45, so you don't want to go too long.
I don't really have a question. I just want to say this is fabulous.
Oh, good.
I can see all kinds of applications. In fact, while I was sitting there, I started doing a map of the library I work at,
Very
and
nice.
the different things we do in the library, and then the different component parts to be continued.
Yeah.
Because we're thinking about how we want to be restructuring some of what we do, and this will be incredibly helpful. So
I think you have a visual sense of, again, where do you sort of put your time and money and effort,
Sure.
and how do, if you increase your instruction, something else has to sort of shift. You can sort of see it in a visual
He's
visual
totally
way.
an administrator now. He's like, no, you can't do everything. It's kind of great. Other question? Any like practical questions about implementing any of this? Like, it's going to look different in every context. It's like the eternal out. Yes, did you want to try the mic? Try it on for size.
I was wondering if you would try different mapping softwares before you selected, what is it,
Mindomo. Some people call it Mendomo, which I like. Yes, there are many different curriculum mapping or concept mapping software packages out there. If you just look for a Wikipedia page, you can just like Google concept mapping software. You'll get a list of hundreds of them. But the FreeMind is a really popular one. Microsoft Visio is kind of an expensive, popular one. This one, it just had the right mix of freeness and openness and ability to collaborate, and just it imposes a structure. That's the one thing that's nice about Mindomo, is that you've got 50 different people using it in one organization. You want some degree of consistency, or it'll just be crazy. You know what I'm saying? So like, it kind of makes you make maps that look similar, if that makes sense. But FreeMind is a great, completely open source alternative to that. Maybe a couple more questions. It's just 11:30 right now, so.
I think we got some.
Hi.
I was just hoping you could put your reference slide back.
Yeah, absolutely.
Oh, yeah, sorry
Sorry.
about that.
There's some great ones.
So here's the reference slide, and again, hilariously enough, there's really not a lot of literature on curriculum visualization. I don't really know that there needs to be. It's a very intuitive process. So most of this is about threshold concepts, which is really something that you can dig into theoretically. The visualization aspect, that's not kind of traditional curriculum mapping with outcomes to classes. Like, it's visualization. You do it yourself as you go. So.
And as a follow-up to this, Brian, you had a slide that had a definition of threshold concepts.
Sure.
When was that from?
It's
Was
probably,
it from the book that you?
Yeah, it's probably
Yes.
from the transformative.
Landmeyer and Smith, right?
Okay.
Or the.
Thank you.
Yeah, if you looked at Landmeyer and Smith, they have about 3 books out, which there's their first one, then there's their discipline one, and then there's one that's about transformative learning. And they kind of use that definition throughout the one. And they also kind of phrase those 5 qualities over and over again. So any of the introductions that they have would cover that. Yeah.
This is a question that may be opening a can of worms we don't have the time for. But
I'm like, cut the mic.
but just, we kind of played the game of mapping out some conceptual threshold concepts for information literacy.
Right.
And then you showed us your kind of the curriculum map model for how we would engage with the learners over the course of their education. So have either of you had the opportunity yet to kind of take your curriculum map and start plugging in where you think each threshold concept for information literacy might fit in, and does that then influence what you do at each level of the person's learning experiences?
That was that rubric map example from environmental analysis. So that's the closest that we've come. And it was really more from the angle of information literacy concepts or get this idea of research acumen. So we were saying, at what classes could we really, engage the learner most authentically and most meaningfully with these concepts? We identified them, and that's what we did. But this idea of doing it from a disciplinary perspective, I haven't done that yet. And I think it would be actually very, very useful to actually identify in the class from a disciplinary perspective what a student is grappling with, what they're learning, the concepts that they're encountering, and then saying, all right, do I fit in here? Is a librarian, is library collaboration meaningful at this level, or is it more about like a collections-based support at this level? And this is intensely useful for collection development. It's bizarrely useful.
Yeah. And I think with threshold concepts, again, there's not a good rubric that's out there that's saying, here's all the threshold concepts in all these disciplines. That's sort of a conversation that's still being had, again, at conferences and everything. Something I'll just kind of share just to it flirts with what you're kind of getting at, but it's this concept, it's this is a quote that comes from an article about threshold concepts in dentistry, I guess, where they kind of say, all knowledge is not of equal value. There are some propositions take precedence over others, and knowledge frameworks of experts, and that teachers and students should focus their efforts on those fundamental concepts that are critical to understanding. So it's kind of it's kind of that again, pinpointing, here's kind of the meaningful interactions that we can have,
Right.
but again, being sort of empathetic or being sort of knowledgeable about, here's sort of those keystone, maybe not necessarily classes, but again, those points, assignments even, that faculty are struggling with, students are struggling with. Is there some sort of meaningful way that we can get involved, at least even kind of showing we know what you're kind of going through, and,
Yeah.
and you know, builds that partnership.
And again, I really want to emphasize what Brian mentioned earlier. This is about our strategy. You know, we can communicate it to the people that we're working with, but this is the behind-the-scenes stuff. It doesn't have to stay behind the scenes, but it's super important to breaking out of that like tunnel vision approach to things and just being like, these are the concepts that I cover in my class. You know, like teaching this interface, teaching that. You can just kind of like imagine what you would need to do to start from scratch if you threw all of that out. It's a really excellent way to begin that kind of like scratch teaching. It's definitely what I hope for my institution in the future.
11:35.
Does anybody want to bolt?
Are you hanging out
Um,
for a little while?
yeah. So, I mean,
We'll hang
do
out.
we need to end, Brenna, is it like this? Or, yeah, okay.
Okay.
So we'll probably just go ahead and, we'll just go ahead and close. And thank y'all very much for being such an engaged
Yeah.
and awesome audience.